Good evening, everyone. My name's Ron Butlin, and I have the honour to be the interviewer today of composer Lyell Cresswell. Not interrogator, interviewer. I worked quite a lot with Edward Harper, giving texts for him for various pieces of music, particularly the Second Symphony, and also the piece for that would have been the Third Symphony, which we'll hear the first movement tonight. I'm the Edinburgh Poet Laureate, the Edinburgh Macker as well, and that also helped us work together in some ways too. Lyle Cresswell, I'm sure, is well known to you all as one of Scotland's most distinguished composers, and one of Scotland's best composers too, as well as being distinguished. And Lyle, as having known Edward very well, was chosen, knew him just not only as a friend, but as a music colleague, and was asked to realize from Edward's notes the symphony, the part of the symphony that we'll hear this evening. Yesterday, in fact, was or would have been Edward's 70th birthday. So I think it's very appropriate that we're here and in looking on this as a celebration not only of the man but also of his music and creativity. And he was so enthusiastic about music, so enthusiastic about words, and so enthusiastic about life itself that the work that we're about to hear kind of pulled everything, all these things together in various forms. But what he left really was just fairly detailed, but sketches really of the first movement. And I think maybe we could start, Lyle, if you didn't mind, just maybe saying something about coming across the sketches and how what you found and how you went.
Yes. Well, the first I knew that I would be doing this was when I read in the paper about the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, with an interview saying that it was hoped that I would be the person who would realize this symphony. Of course, I was not. I was very pleased because I knew Edward so well, and I knew that he was dying, and I was more than happy to do this. In fact, I had in the back of my mind that this might be a task that I would be asked to do, and in fact I would have been upset if anybody else had been asked to do it instead. Of the sketches, there was really only the piece, which I can talk about a little bit, was I think to be in 4 movements, possibly 5 movements. The sketches for the first movement, it was a complete sketch running right through, although sometimes excuse me, sometimes sorry, very sketchy sometimes just on one stave with some indications for orchestration. I've been as faithful as I can to what was there. There are 1 or 2 bits I've had to make up, just linking bits, and some of the orchestration I've had to give my own twist to because it wasn't clear. And I've done the work as a composer, not as a musicologist. A musicologist would have to become the composer, would have to put himself right in the position and try and write the work exactly as the composer intended. Well, I've done my best to realize the score, but I'm seeing it from the point of view of a composer. So occasionally I have made my own composer decisions when it's been not quite clear what the intentions were. A musicologist would have probably looked through other scores and found other solutions, perhaps. But these are only details. I think perhaps the most moving thing I found on working on this movement was to see the handwriting gradually becoming more shaky as the movement as the movement goes on, and sometimes the ideas become a little bit more confused towards, not a lot towards the end, but there's really, I found quite a graphic sort of description of the failing, you know, of Edward gradually dying. So that I found. Sorry. That was the. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was. I didn't mean
That must have been.
that was one of the hardest things
yeah.
that I found with it.
Yes. And did when Edward was writing the music, but was he working on the piano, for example?
That was not his way of working, really.
He didn't work on the computer. I would be surprised.
No. I think he had a computer, but it was somewhere hidden in a bedroom, and nobody.
I don't think it surfaced.
It was only discovered
quite a long time ago.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
But his way of working was to sit and think in the pub with a beer, or walking in the hills. Oh, I must tell you another story. I'm sorry, I rambled, but there's a story. We were walking in the hills in the Borders with Edward a year or so ago. No, 2 or 3 years ago, quite a while ago. And there were some children playing in a field and shouting. And the bigger girl of the two ran up to us and said, "Sorry about the language coming out the field, it's my brother." And Edward was very taken. This appealed very much to his sense of humour. Sorry, how did I continue on to that? This was the way he worked. He would be walking in the hills, thinking things through, or as I say, sitting over a pint of beer, thinking things through, rather than working at the piano. And then he would come down to his desk and write down a few things. This is why the sketches, they're so sketchy. I mean, my way of working is completely different. I have pages and pages of writings crossed out. I'm always thinking on paper, whereas he was always thinking in his head. And so he didn't talk about it very much either. He didn't talk very much about the details. So it was a very private way of composing. And what we had to go on was really only those few pages, and the score the pages that I realised it from. Clearly, when he would go through and make a fair copy, he would change things. He would also. I didn't feel inhibited about making some changes where I thought things could be changed, because I know, although they might not have been the changes that I made, there very likely would have been changes that he would have made
as he might have gone on.
Yeah.
And the symphony itself, it relies, well, not relies on, but is inspired quite a lot by different texts, particularly Burns.
Yes.
Particularly Burns.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something about?
Well, the piece was commissioned for the homecoming, so
right.
there was to be a Burns connection. The poem that he sets is The Banks of Doon, which the movement ends with the tune Ye Banks and Braes, sung to the traditional tune. The music gradually works its way towards this. He sets the poem in reverse order, the second verse first, and then the first verse to finish the movement. And for the second movement, he was planning this to set Ron's poem, which is printed in the program, which was to be a scherzo. And he did tell us this, he was planning to write a double fugue. Now, there are some sketches of the beginning of this double fugue, but I don't think, even as a student, I've ever written a double fugue, and nor do I intend to. So I'm afraid there was no possibility of completing this movement. In any case, the sketches are quite brief. There isn't enough material anyway. But that was to be a lively movement. Yeah. Maybe you could say something.
Yes, the second movement, I must say I was very pleased, having worked with Edward several times, where he'd asked me for texts. You know, it's sometimes quite funny texts, sometimes quite serious texts. when he asked me for this, and I said, oh, well, you know, what do you want it about? And then he said, I want it about the meeting between Burns and Scott. I must say my heart sunk. You know, I thought, oh my God, how can I make this lively? You know, because it's such a sort of laden kind of meeting of these two people. And just by the way, in fact, Burns and Scott met just about 150 yards up the street from where I live, in Edinburgh, just in Sheen's House Place. So that was good, you know, that was a start. But I did say to Edward, I said, look, man, this could be really kind of monumentally kind of heavy. Is it all right if I, you know, maybe lighten it up a bit? Because he said he wanted a scherzo, you know, a scherzo about kind of Burns meeting Scott.
And the double fugue.
And with a double fugue. So I thought, my jinx, what will I do here? So, well, you see what's in the program, what I ended up with, which is quite a very playful kind of getting together of the two guys, and they're actually getting together in the present day in a sort of surreal form. Because Edward had read a book that I did a few years ago, Vivaldi and the Number 3, which I don't know, some of you might know. It's very surreal, very playful about composers. And so he said, no, something along that line. So I got Burns and Scott to meet in present day, and they had their kind of chanting followers with them, like kind of football supporters. So there were like two teams that were kind of in confrontation with each other. And I thought, oh God, what's he going to make of this? And so I gave it to him, and he said, oh, that's great. That's exactly what I want. So I was very, very pleased. And I'm just so sorry that obviously he didn't live to complete it. But you say he did begin this.
He certainly did. Yes. No. There are a couple of pages of it. It's quite sketchy and quite hard to read, and not enough to be able to. But he was. Yes, he was.
How many pages were there, by the way, for the first movement that you then?
Oh, I don't know. About a dozen.
About a dozen. So there's quite a considerable.
Yes, I think. Yeah. Some more or less. Yeah. Some with not very much on them, though, and some,
right.
and some with duplicate, some with things which I had to decide whether they were repeated or whether they were just the same thing written out again.
Yes, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I know that it was the Homecoming, but I can see because he also chose other work.
Yes, well, the third movement. This is not absolutely certain, but I think the third movement was a setting of Robert Garriott.
Yeah.
You can talk about the poem, but there's one page which has two bars marked Andante. I think one bar's 3/4 and one's 5/8 or something like that. Yeah. Just two bars, and it says Canongate on it. So and there was also a photocopy of the Robert Garriott poem.
Oh, the poem, yeah.
On Robert Ferguson's grave.
Yes.
Yes. And so that which is in the Canongate. So I think his third movement was to be a setting of that poem.
This is a poem, I don't know if some of you know it. Yeah, Robert Garriott, Edinburgh poet, wrote principally in Scots. Very, very funny, cynical, light-hearted, mostly sonnets, but with really serious centre to them. But one of the poems he wrote that was absolutely serious from the word go was a sonnet at the grave of Robert Ferguson. And it finishes with a line that goes something along, and here Burns knelt and kissed the moo, kissed the earth, you know, to show his devotion to Ferguson, the poet, and seeing him as in line with him. So did Edward himself have a strong feel for Burns? Was this... Well, he was very literary.
Yes. Edward was a romantic, really.
Yes.
And he liked using folk music and things involved in it. The kind of poetry he liked was a kind of sort of wistful, regional poetry. He liked setting. He seemed to me to like setting the work of people who lived where he lived. He was very interested in doing things from Hardy, Edward Thomas, and William Barnes, who were all from the places where he spent a lot of time or grew up.
He grew up in Somerset?
He was born in Somerset and spent his, I don't know exactly, his youth there, but his parents then moved to Hazelmere and Surrey or Hampshire, that area. And he used to spend a lot of time there outside the university holidays. And so Edward Thomas and William Barnes were Dorset, Hampshire poets from that area. And he did like, I mean, this thing about delighting in the language coming out to the field, you know, he did.
Yes.
He liked this kind of regional, which I mean,
sounds.
Yes. Which is very tricky to set. I mean, unless you're steeped in a language to set. And I think Burns was to be. I don't know whether this is true or not. I think possibly the fourth movement was to be a setting. The first movement, The Banks of Doon, begins with two words, flow gently, from another poem, Afton Water, which I wonder if he might have been going to set that for the last movement. I mean, the only reason I think that is because the first one is about sort of false love, and Afton Water is about true love, and that would have made a nice, perhaps a subdued symphony. I mean, it wouldn't have been a rip-roaring finale, but it might have been a nice balance, sort of slightly melancholy, but also full of hope. But I've no idea whether that was the case or not. I mean, just possibly.
Because he was, I think Edward was a composer that was particularly drawn to words. You know, like with the symphonies, he used texts again and again and again. Yes. But also, I think he did opera.
Yes. There are two chamber operas. There's the Mellstock Choir and Fanny Robin, both based on Hardy. There's a full-scale opera, Hedda Gabler, and I think there's a children's opera. I'm not sure. I think that's all. I think there are four. I might have missed something, but I think that's.
And he did, I think it.
Oh, there's the Spire.
The Spire. That's a very.
Yes, of course. Yes, that was a sort of large chamber opera, of course, which has not had a performance yet.
Yes, I think, but I don't. The Spire was a work that, if I remember right, was commissioned by ECAT. Is that?
Yes, it was. Yes.
That's the Edinburgh Contemporary Arts Trust, and from what I remember, Edward, I'm afraid I don't know so much. I didn't really see any of it, but I remember him telling me at one point, he said, oh yes, at one point in this opera, the whole building collapses right in, you know, on stage. You know, this whole cathedral or something completely collapsed, Salisbury Cathedral. And I thought, I could see why they might have difficulty staging this, you know. So
it's based on the William Golding novel.
On the William Golding novel, that's
but the performance collapsed, strangely enough, because I think it was commissioned, and then there was supposed to be some sponsorship from a bank, which shall remain nameless. At the last minute, pulled out and said they weren't going to.
Really?
And this was before the.
So was everything all ready to go?
The score was complete. I mean, there were maybe some things that he was still going to do to it, and that was about 10 years before he died, I think, more or less, roughly.
Yes. Oh.
So the bankers were in trouble then, and it collapsed. Something collapsed. But that was a real shame, and it was very difficult to find the kind of sponsorship that was needed to.
And as you can imagine, with the opera, I mean, Lyle and I are both involved quite a lot in opera. I mean, we've done what, four operas? Three. Lost count now. Three operas together, and we know just how hard it is. I mean, now that I've become involved in doing opera, I can see why Rossini used to write them in a fortnight, because he must have spent the rest of his time wheeling and dealing in the background, trying to get people to...
Cooking and eating.
Cooking and eating, and trying to get people to put up the money for it. And so I can see that with Edward he's doing, but Edward did have, for a large part of his life, he was also a teacher, I think.
Yes, he taught at Edinburgh University right from 1960 something right through.
Right.
He was there a long time, more than 40 years.
And how did that equate with his?
Well, I think that's why he didn't write a huge amount, and I think that's why he tended to write in the holidays and not. Or if something was on the go, of course, he could be working over them. But generally speaking, it seems to me, I don't know exactly, but it seems to be more or less that his writing was confined to the holiday.
To the holidays. So that must have been quite frustrating, I would think.
He never complained about this.
Yeah.
I think he this is the way it was. And,
Yeah.
I'm not. It's probably not. It's quite as straightforward as that. I mean, there would have been times when he was writing as well when he was teaching, but that was sort of more or less his approach.
Yeah, and my impression of what I've know of Edward's music is very, very passionate, very intense, romantic in the kind of very good sense of the word, not in the kind of, oh dear, you know, the world's so big and I'm so small, who am I? Not in that sense, but in a real questioning, kind of underscoring of a real humanity, passion of humanity, the passion of being alive, really. Was Edward's music.
Especially later, the early music, like all of us, he started with all the serial techniques and things, you know, the more dry things, but gradually, and
did he have an electronic period?
Oh, no, he never touched the stuff. Although in the Spire there was to be some recorded material, but I think perhaps he was going to have some assistance in realising the recorded material. But yes, and the music became softer and more as especially later. The later music there's a lot. He was writing a lot later, partly because he had Louise.
Yes. Yes, but then the Second Symphony, for example, that's the one that I gave him a text for. That's an incredibly powerful, and it arises from, during the kind of conflicts in Israel and Palestine, and what was going on there, and about how, a child had died, and his organs were used to give life to, I think it was another child on the other side, and backwards and forwards. So it was this sort of making something positive out of this. And when I talked with him about, writing a text about this, I gave him something that I thought was quite dramatic. And my goodness, when I heard the music, I had to stand back, because the last thing it was, Lyle, was quiet and reflective. Well, yes, it was very, very dramatic and full of a kind of anger that people could squander their lives in these sort of hateful conflicts when there was so much love, there was so much goodwill and humanity existing between people. And eventually the symphony goes through that hatred and comes out at the end with a very, very fully compassionate statement. What kind of, lately we've looked a lot at the words, what about the music? What kind of composers would you say Edward himself admired or drew from, was influenced by?
His music very often involved quotes from other composers. Going further back, Elgar features in things. There's a piece that was played here in the City Hall yesterday in Casa after Monteverdi, quoting from the Toccata from Orfeo. He wrote a piece using some Bartók quotes. I think maybe some Mendelssohn at some stage. Mostly, or folk music, very often, not every piece, but very often, especially pieces involving voices, seem to me that they had this other association, a musical association with some other
like
music.
That Mahler piece.
Well, that was, yes, and that was another thing in a way. That was an orchestration of the Mahler Kindertotenlieder, which he was commissioned to write for 7 instruments, I think string quartet, piano, clarinet, horn and flute, I think. And he was very moved. I remember talking to him a long time ago, because I love Mahler, and he wasn't so keen on Mahler. But as he grew older, we come to these things, and he was very much involved in the setting, in the orchestrating or whatever you call it, this version, making this chamber version of the Kindertotenlieder. And also he was touched by the idea of the death of children, because death was never very far from him in a way, because Dorothy died of cancer.
That was his first wife.
The mother of his children. And of course then later he was facing the cancer. So, so he was very affected by that. How much the musical influence is I don't know how much of a real musical. I think it's musical inspirations came. He was very English in his in the influences, apart from the Scots. Well, a bit of the Scots too. The Scots tunes that he has used in some pieces. But Elgar he was very passionately keen about Elgar.
And did he feel himself part of, let's say, the Scottish music world, or the British, or the English, being that he was English himself?
He was very much part of the Scottish world. In the city, he was one of probably the main moving force in setting up in the 70s the New Music Group of Scotland, which did wonderful things. So Eddie's there. Eddie knows much more about this than I do.
Eddie Maguire.
Yes. But did a lot for Scottish music. So he was and very generous. He was not concerned just with his own music. He was concerned in bringing in
this. The New Music Group. This was a platform really for commissioning and performing.
Yes. It was
contemporary music.
Yes, it was a chamber, a loose chamber. Different. They were not always the same players. There were some regular players, but a loose chamber group who they would find a program and bringing works from abroad, from India, bringing contemporary works to Scotland, but also very much involved in commissioning and supporting Scottish composers. And he conducted it. Sometimes played the piano for it, but more often he was the director. So in that sense, he was very much involved in Scottish music. I don't think. Well, I don't know how. I mean, that's the same for me. I don't know how one sees one.
Because you're from New Zealand, I'm thinking.
So you don't think about that. You're just trying to be obviously where you live, where you're formed, all these things come together and have something. But certainly, I mean, he lived in Scotland for much more than more than half his life. So
he was at Oxford, I think, beforehand. Was that as a student?
Yes,
or did he?
Yes. He was in Italy briefly studying, maybe after that, and then I think he came here to Edinburgh.
Up to Edinburgh, and then taught at the university. University there. Very good. So Edward was a very giving person. As you can see, working with the students, working with other composers, which is a very selfless act to do, because as any composer will tell you, it's very hard, you're trying to get commissions, trying to get performances for yourself, and actually to spend time doing it on behalf of other people is an extraordinarily selfless act to do. And this was. I didn't know Edward so much as a professional musician, apart from working with him with texts. But just to share with you, just for a moment, a more personal thing was that when my own wife was diagnosed with cancer about 3 years ago. She's now mercifully through it. And one of the people who helped her to get through it most of all was Edward. Because while he himself was undergoing treatment, he would also come with Louise and give my wife Reggie support, drive her to the hospital, we don't have a car, and give her all the support while he himself was suffering and undergoing treatment. And it's such a tragedy that he did not make it through. But he has left this rich legacy of music. And tonight we're going to hear this piece. I think was last in St Andrews. Was that
Wednesday
the first
night.
Wednesday
Yes,
night?
that was the first. Yes.
That was the first time it was heard, and so that will be tonight. We hear it's called Pastoral. Pastoral, and it would have been the first movement of Edward Harper's Third Symphony, and it will begin the second half of the concert tonight. I think that's right. So, thank you very much, and thank you, Lyle. Thank you all.